Hi everybody, this is Tracy Johnson. Welcome to ED753. I'm excited to get to work with you guys and to have you in class. We do start our meetings, our Zoom meetings promptly on time, so I'm showing 5 o'clock on Wednesday, October 30th. So here we go, Zoom meeting number 1. I am really excited about this class. It's the first time that not only I've ever taught it, but the class has ever been offered or taught here at LSUS. So I think it's a great opportunity, not only for us to kind of learn and grow together, but to also really set the standard for what urban education is going to be about here at LSUS. So you are pioneers with me, and we're going to take off and explore and hopefully learn a lot of exciting and interesting things from each other. So tonight I wanted to do a couple of things with you. Primarily, I want to walk through just some things about the class and how we're going to do things, take you through some of the Moodle modules, and then get into just a little bit of the meat of what it means to talk about and the kind of work we're going to be doing around urban education reform. So without further ado, I'm going to share my slideshow with you, so bear with me just 1 second while I get this pulled up. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see this okay. But like I said, tonight we're really talking about and working on education reform and welcoming you to our class. Let's talk for a second about what we're going to try to do. So, you know, when we do these meetings, you know, and as well as our discussion forums, I will ask you to do some work that requires you to introduce yourself to everybody. We have a small class, which is, you know, both good and bad, so there's not a ton of people to interact with. But I do hope, because like I said, you guys really are pioneers. You're the first group to ever take one of the urban education courses that are new here at LSUS. So your feedback is really going to be essential to helping us make this program grow, expand, and be very successful. So we're also going to spend some time tonight talking and walking through Moodle, so I'll kind of give you a guided tour of that. We'll also show you how to submit an assignment and what the Turnitin app that's within your assignments is what that is all about. We'll talk a little bit more about textbooks, task stream, and things like that, as well as our Zoom meeting expectations. And then finally, you know, I'll include my little pet peeves as a professor, just so that you kind of know, you know, what makes me tick, as well as what I call Survival 101, so how you can do well in the class. But before we get into sort of the meat of things this evening, I do want you to pay attention to this. So hopefully some of you are familiar with the app that's available both through Google or, you know, on the Androids as well as in the Apple iTunes store, called Remind. It's a super simple app. I used it both in my work when I was still working in the public school system, as well as here at LSUS with my students. So I have set up through the Remind app a class code for everybody, a class, and it just says ED753, and the class code is D as in dog, the number 4, so D4F as in Fred, 779G as in go. So if you would, you know, download that app, and then this is your code to be able to enter into the class. That way I can send you reminders and things about class or information. So hopefully you'll find that really helpful. But let's go ahead now and look for a second at Moodle. So let me stop sharing that and pull up, sorry, it takes me a second here, pull up my Moodle course. So I've been working in here tonight, so let me go ahead and save and switch over so you guys can see. Sorry, my computer's going to be slow. And let me change my view also so you'll see the same thing as a student that instead of mine, because mine has a lot of other stuff. Okay, so let's do this. Hang on 1 second. Okay, so I'm going to again share. So now we're looking, hopefully, you're switched over and you're now looking at Moodle. So let's talk for just a second about how the course is set up. So you should be looking at ED753. You know, there's information. So when you first log in, let's even go back a little bit further. Let me do this with you. So let's assume that you have come into the LSUS website and you're thinking, okay, how do I get into Moodle? So the first thing you do, click here, go down to Moodle, and you'll see the link. And I've already logged in, so you'll log in, and your first screen may look like this. It may not. It may look like this. But you can turn on and off the sidebar in Moodle here by clicking on this little icon right here. So, you know, I happen to like this being here because it just makes life easier. As you can see, I have a lot of different courses that I'm responsible for and things that I'm doing. You probably won't have as many. You should have a resource center of some kind, as well as something as far as your courses listed. So let's go ahead and look specifically at the course. Okay, so we've got the first part, the welcome. Hopefully you've had time to go through and look at this. So you'll see that we've got a news forum. We've got lots of helpful resources. We've got the instructor's virtual office. You know, all of those kinds of things are available here. The syllabus, the assignments, meeting information, etc. So you are responsible for knowing this stuff. So if it's listed in the syllabus or you have a question, these are your first places to check. Now, the other thing that you're going to find in here is what's called the Instructor Virtual Office. So I'm just going to click on it. And this is where you can go and put, if you have a question or something like that about something that's going on, you can just add a new discussion topic, type it in here, so whatever the question may be or the subject or whatever, type your information. If you want to attach or include a document, you simply drag and drop it here, and then you hit the Post to Forum button. Now, I'm going to not actually post anything tonight, so I'm going to cancel. But what's important to remember is this is a great place to get feedback from other people, you know, about maybe an assignment or a question you have or just a discussion. Just keep in mind that everybody in the course can see this. So this is not a place that if you have a question about your specific grade or something like that to put, that would be a direct email to me. But this is the Instructor Virtual Office. So let's go back over to everything. So you can see here the syllabus, you simply click on it. Hopefully you've done this, the weekly calendar assignments, general information about Zoom. Some of you may have had to purchase TaskStream for a different course. We do not use TaskStream in mine, so you don't have to worry about that. And here is the first week of the class. So we are in the Getting Started week 1, Module 1, and talks a little bit about how the course is set up, everything that we're going to do. Faculty information here. You can see my picture, yay. But this is my contact information. So here's my email address, my physical location at LSUS, my office phone number, and then I also give you my cell phone number. But if you don't mind, I ask that you only text me at first because I literally work with over 1,000 students between classes that I teach, the advisement that I do, the program coordination. So a lot of times people will call me, I have no idea who they are, so I just don't answer. So text me and say, hey, you know, Ms. Johnson or Tracy, this is, you know, so-and-so, and I have a question about. You know, and a lot of times, you know, I may just go ahead and call you at that point. I may respond via text, but do that first so I know who I'm talking to, okay? So let's go back over here again. Gives you a little bit of my background. Then we have the technical requirements. The other thing I want you to be aware of are the student services. We have a lot of services here at LSUS that are available to you even as a 100% online student. So this is where you can go. These are all hot links to find out about our career services or counseling, financial aid. Our Student Success Center has free tutoring. those kinds of things, as well as specific information about our disability services, Title IX, etc. So these are all things that you can do. Also, if you're having problems with Moodle or anything like that, here's the information about how to talk to or work with our Informational Technology Services Department, or ITS, and they will be more than happy to help you. It's usually best if you email them because they're actually only answering your phone between 8, well, they've expanded their hours, so they're 8 a.m. to approximately 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, but this always gets monitored, so that's a surefire way to get through to them. Okay, so you've seen that. So your assignments for this week. You'll notice you've got some articles and online readings. So I can simply click on this link and you will see here's a hot link to one of the articles right there. So hopefully you've read that. Okay. Sorry, let me click back out of this. Here's the second article as well. So again, hopefully you've read that and those links hopefully are working fine for you. If not, just let me know. Then there's an actual article that you have to read. So since this article is not an online article, it's an actual article, you'll see it's included in this folder. So it's right here, While School Integration Matters, and you simply click on it. I'm going to open that, and that takes me to the article that I want you to read. So pretty simple, straightforward. You can't mess it up. Just kind of do what you got to do. So. Okay, let's go back over here again. So not only do you have some things to read under assignments, you also have a forum post to do. So here's the forum. It's due by this Sunday. And what you're going to do is simply click on this. And you will see that we've had one person already respond. So Kirsten has, and then I did mine as well. So what you're going to do is you just simply read these directions, and then you're going to, and you can see where mine is. Let me go back. Let me do that over. We'll do a new one. Okay, so when I go to the discussion forum again, hang on, sorry. My computer does wonky things sometimes. Okay, so if you were going to start yours, you would do add a new discussion topic, write your name here, follow this, then answer the questions. If you want to add an article or something, you can. Then when you're done, you'll post it to the forum. Now I'm going to cancel because I've already done my posting. Then once you've done your posting, you will have to respond to at least 3 of your classmates. I pulled up Kirsten's here, and we need some other students to respond to her. I will respond to her, obviously, as well. You have the option, you have to respond to at least 3 of your peers. So you can respond to me, you can respond to Kirsten, ideally respond to both of us, because this is where we want to get a dialogue going. So this is our way of having class discussion. We just do it virtually as opposed to face-to-face. Okay, so that's your assignment for this week. We're trying to start off a little bit easy, as well as give you kind of a taste of who's here. Then obviously this is where we find our Zoom meeting links. So anytime you know we have a Zoom meeting coming up, go here and you click on this and you will see the information needed to get into it. And then you will also find the presentation. So tonight, the presentation that I'm using is posted here for you. It's in PowerPoint form, or if you don't have that on your computer, I also give you the PDF. Same information, just 2 different formats. So you'll have to look at the end to see which one is better for you, okay? This is also where, after class tonight, I'll post the recording of the meeting. Then here are some just other documents. Sometimes I'll put just some bonus sort of articles in there because, one of the things I always like to do is, build my repertoire as well as my library of professional readings and information. But here it talks about the discussion forum instructions as well as the rubric. So that's everything for this week. Okay, so let's stop sharing again and let me go back to the PowerPoint that we had. Here it is. And let me do share again so you can see it. And let's talk about a couple more things. Okay, let me do this again, sorry. So you can actually see that, not see all the notes. Okay, so One of the things that I think is helpful and important tonight for you to know is, just a little bit about my background and my context, so that, you're kind of like, okay, so who are you? What are you? Kind of thing. Well, as you know, my name is Tracy Johnson. I have many roles here at LSUS. I am the College of Business Special Events Director, and I also direct for the College of Business Strategic Partnerships. Then I am the Masters of Healthcare Administration Program Coordinator and Advisor. Then I also serve as adjunct faculty in both the educational leadership and educational curriculum and instruction graduate program. So I wear lots of hats here at LSUS. But I actually began my career, I was a teacher. I began my career in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. My first 4 years I spent teaching in a private school in Highland Park, which if you're familiar with the Dallas area is a very well-to-do section of the city. And I worked with primarily developmentally delayed and students who had some learning differences and things like that, but they were ages 3 to 5. So I did that from the preschool perspective. I also taught kindergarten. Decided that I wanted to save the world, so I left Highland Park and I went to work by choice in the Dallas Independent School District, where I was a high school English teacher. I also taught K through 6 resource class. This was back before we were doing inclusion, etc. So my primary teaching was done with special needs students as well as with high school students in English. I started as a department chair, a team leader, I wrote curriculum. I did a lot of things during my tenure as a teacher. Decided I wanted to go into administration, and I got probably one of the most unique jobs that one can get in a school system. I became the desegregation monitor for the Dallas Independent School District. Dallas at the time was under a desegregation court order that required them to desegregate their schools. And part of my role was to look at the various parts of the court order, gather evidence, data, go out to schools, interview people, or all kinds of things to make sure that Dallas was staying in compliance with the court order. I was also the one when they got a concern about something that was related to the covenants in the court order. I had to go and investigate and make a recommendation. I reported to the court system, but I provided periodic updates and information to the school board as well. So really, really interesting job. I learned a ton and got to visit every single school in the district, which was a huge task considering that they have well over 200 schools. But like I said, really learned a lot. And I guess that's kind of where my passion for urban education began. Did that for several years, then really, really missed being around kids. And so I was made the Dean of Students at Booker T. Washington High School for the Performing and Visual Arts. And then from there, started to pursue campus level administration. So they made me the elementary principal at Rosemont Elementary in Dallas. Then I became the middle school principal at Alex W. Spence, also in Dallas. Then really my passion was high school. And so I decided that I really, truly wanted to go to the high school level. So they moved me. I actually changed districts at that time and got hired in Irving, in the Irving Independent School District. I became the principal of MacArthur High School. At the time, Irving was growing pretty substantially. So it was a large high school. I had between, depending on the year, 2,600 and 2,800 students, well over 200 faculty and staff members. And probably my favorite job ever was being that big comprehensive high school principal. I absolutely loved it, and really proud of the team that we were able to build there and the kind of work that we did. From there, I got promoted and became the assistant superintendent for secondary teaching and learning in Irving. And then the superintendent of Irving, who I absolutely adored, he was certainly my strongest mentor and advocate for many years, was going to be retiring. And while that's usually not a reason to leave a district or a job, in this case, in my mind, it was. He had been the superintendent in that school district for more than 20 years. And so I knew it was going to be a very rough transition, which proved to be true. So Dallas ISD just happened to call me, and they had a school, Booker T. Washington, which I'd been at before, that was really kind of struggling, lots of issues. And they said, we want you to come back and be the principal of the school because we know you can take care of these things. And even though it was a smaller school, only 900 students, they, I guess, needed help so badly, they were willing to pay me my assistant superintendent level salary. So I was at Booker T. Washington High School for the Performing and Visual Arts. I was the principal there for 5 years, and then got promoted again, this time in Dallas, and I became what they called an area superintendent or executive director, and I supervised approximately 18,000 students and schools and all of that. Did that, loved it, but fell in love and got married again, my second marriage, and my husband was from this area, and you know, we were debating, do we want to stay in the Dallas area, do we want to come this way, and I just decided that it was time for a change. So I did a Google search, which never happens, right, and landed here at LSUS, and I've absolutely loved my new home. I've been here in Bossier now for 4 years, and most importantly, I absolutely love the students. And I did not realize over the course of my career, when I was primarily working in administration, how much I miss teaching. So it's been exciting to come back. I'm teaching freshmen this year, as well as 2 graduate level courses this session. So here I am. Just in terms of the Zoom meeting, like I said, we do start on time. I do record it, you know, and I want it to be a place where you guys can really learn a lot of things. So in terms of pet peeves or how to get along with your instructor, or, you know, the truth about me, I am pretty easygoing. I think students who've had me in the past will concur. You know, a deadline is a deadline, yes, and, you know, please try to meet them. But if something comes up, I know what it's like in the life of the school and how crazy things can get. Just let me know. It's all about communication. You know, I do accept late assignments without penalty as long as we've had some conversation around it. So, you know, like I said, I'm pretty easygoing. The whole goal for me here is this is really about mastery of learning. It's not about a grade. So, you know, I may tell you to redo something to get it to the standard necessary, but like I said, it's really that whole idea of outcome-based learning as opposed to the grade. What are my pet peeves? I really don't have a lot, except even though LSUS calls me Tracy Johnson, I worked really hard to get rid of that last name, Fraley, and everybody else in the whole world, including the United States government and Social Security, know me as Tracy Johnson. Please feel free to call me Tracy. You know, I don't get hung up on titles and things like that, but, you know, please try to avoid Fraley if you can. I won't bite your head off, but, you know, it just kind of irritates me. So, like I said, pretty easy to get along with, hopefully, and like I said, I see this very much as a journey for us to take together. So, let's talk about the purpose of this class, and I want to give you some background information about urban education. So I don't know how far we'll be able to get because I do want to be mindful of time. Since this is our first meeting, I try to keep it around 30-40 minutes as opposed to the full hour. But you are here, as I said, in the first urban education, the inaugural class for LSUS. And so this really came out of some conversations that started about 2.5 years ago with the dean of the college, Dr. Albers, as well as Dr. Perry, who's our program director. And coming from Dallas and Irving, which are 2 very urban centers in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex and certainly urban districts, one of the things that, you know, as I said, has always been my passion has been urban ed. But as we began talking to principals and teachers and things in Northwest Louisiana, and particularly in Caddo Parish and some of our students down in New Orleans, you know, LSUS was producing graduates at the, you know, certainly coming out of the teacher education program, who were very sound with their pedagogy. They had lots of great skills and all that, but they really didn't know how to relate to urban schools, as well as how to best prepare urban children. So we started dreaming and thinking and talking and decided that really we needed to do something around the idea of urban education. And so out of that grew the urban educational leadership degree or focus, as well as the curriculum and instruction urban teacher. And lots of reasons to do this. Obviously, it meets a need here locally and in Caddo schools, as well as some of our others here in the state of Louisiana. But it's also a huge need across the country. Urban children, they're like all children. We want to have the best success possible, but there are some things that are a little bit different that you need to know and understand, some nuances that can make a huge difference in how successful our urban schools and our urban students can be. So we're going to talk and hopefully learn in the course about why urban education is different and what the unique and special challenges as well as opportunities you'll have in urban ed. So let's go back and do a little bit of a history lesson. So really the roots of urban education began back in the late 1800s. And at the time, schools that were in urban centers were considered to be far superior to the schools that were in our rural areas. There wasn't really a suburb kind of thing happening yet, but urban schools were where people thought the best education was happening. So the beginnings of segregation and desegregation in the United States as it relates to schools began with a very famous Supreme Court case called Plessy versus Ferguson. And this happened in 1896. And it is considered even today as one of the landmark decisions that the Supreme Court has handed down. So if you take school law, you will probably do quite a bit of reading and learning about this. So it all started when there was an incident in which and it actually happened here in Louisiana, in New Orleans. There was an African-American train passenger. His name was Homer Plessy. And at the time, we had separate train cars for blacks and for whites. So Homer Plessy was getting on the train and he was told to sit in the black car. Well, he refused to do that. And he claimed that his constitutional rights were being violated. That basically, that he wasn't being allowed the same rights as a white person, and that because he was being told where to sit, that was a violation of his basic civil rights. So he decided to file a court case, and it ended up going all the way through to the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court at the time ruled that there was only a legal distinction between whites and blacks, or the fact that there was a legal distinction between whites and blacks. What had happened was unconstitutional. Oh, excuse me, I'm just really messing this up. Let me start over. The court said that the law that gave the Jim Crow laws that came out of the Civil War that said, we had designated things for whites and designated things for blacks, and we couldn't intermingle and all of that was only a legal distinction. And that therefore, since it was just a legal distinction, it wasn't unconstitutional. So this kind of opened the door for that Jim Crow legislation that came out of the Civil War to really become very rooted within the culture as well as the laws. And that it was okay that we had separate accommodations throughout, public places and all of that based on race. It became very, very commonplace to do that. So when that happened, you may have heard the term separate but equal. That's where that whole idea came from. It was from this court case. It did, in fact, affect and impact the schools. So you had white schools and you had black schools. So interesting fact, the school that I was principal at, as well as Dean of Students, Booker T. Washington High School for the Performing Visual Arts, was actually one of those black schools in the Dallas ISD. It opened in 1922, and it was only for the African-American students who lived in that community. There was a different school for the white students. Fast forward, remember I was that desegregation monitor, so in 1976 when Dallas went under a court order to desegregate their schools. They decided to change Booker T. Washington, which was only for blacks, from an all-black school or designated location to integrate it, and they changed it into a magnet school so they could hopefully attract students from all different races and ethnicities as part of that desegregation process. So a lot of things came out of this very, very important case. Okay, and so if you're really interested in it, just do a Google search. There's some really, like I said, it's a very interesting case and how it was decided. Okay. So the next really important case that happened was the Brown versus the Board of Education Supreme Court decision. This came down, the case was actually filed in 1954, but the decision didn't come until 1956. And in this particular case, they claimed that, you know, just because things were separate, they could not be equal. And this really sort of set the stage for the civil rights movement, and was a way for that to really kind of blossom and grow. So in his lawsuit, Brown, who was the plaintiff, claimed that schools for black children were not equal to the white schools, and that this actually violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which says no state can deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, whatever, we all have protections under that 14th Amendment. So it actually started first and went to district court in Kansas, and they actually, and they stated that segregation was detrimental to our African American children. It may give them a sense of inferiority, but the Kansas court still upheld the separate but equal doctrine. Around the same time, other cases were being filed across the country, and you may have heard of somebody called Thurgood Marshall, who ended up becoming a wonderful Supreme Court justice. They decided these other cases, they combined them all together and actually took this all the way to the Supreme Court. So, according to the way the court ruled, that the plaintiffs were actually being deprived of their equal protection as guaranteed by the 14th Amendment, and so that they reversed it and said that we had to integrate and make sure that we had schools that were for all children. We could no longer divide students by race. It was sort of the foundation and beginning of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and then the Fair Housing Act of 1968. So these two cases have had a really profound impact on the way that we do schooling now. So important to know and understand that these were in many ways the beginning of looking at urban schools a little bit differently. Okay. So I'm not going to get into all this tonight just because of the time, but one of the things that we are going to talk about throughout the course is how population and demographic shifts affects urban education, and I'll give you lots of details about that when we meet again next week. But some other historical acts that really have impacted education overall, but in particular urban education, include the 1972 Individuals with Disabilities Act, or IDEA. That became law for the first time. Prior to that, our students who had disabilities did not have the same level of protection or services that our non-disabled students did. Then in 1973, Bloom's taxonomy was published. That's an important piece in terms of teaching strategies and the way that we approach our children. Also at that time, the Rehabilitation Act, Public Law 94-142, was also enacted. And that is where basically special education came from, that we had to provide services that were specialized to meet the needs of our children with disabilities. So the two kind of follow. You have IDEA, which was a law, and then the Rehabilitation Act, which then begins to specify how we meet the requirements of the IDEA law. In 1982 was another big case. This was a case out of Texas, and schools were claiming that they did not have to educate children who were non-citizens, that because these were not citizens of the United States, they were not privy to the same level of schooling and education, and that they weren't covered under the 14th Amendment. The case was called Plyler versus Doe, and the Supreme Court ultimately ruled that schools must educate all children regardless of citizenship status. So for those of us that work in schools where you had a high immigrant population, you can't even ask what their citizenship is. You just take them all. So that made that, and that in historical context is a relatively recent court decision. Then in 1991, they further expanded on IDEA and Public Law 94-142 when Section 504 became law. So no longer did students have to be officially identified as disabled. There were other ways to get access to accommodations, modifications, and other learning supports under Section 504. Then the other thing that I want to kind of remind you of too is a very significant issue in schooling was in 1994 with the Columbine shooting. That was unfortunately the first mass shooting that impacted schools. And a lot of those lessons learned from that certainly impact how we view schools today, particularly in the urban setting. Okay, so let's keep going, kind of looking through this historically. So in 2001, we have the No Child Left Behind, or NCLB, we're all probably very familiar with. And that has to do with the fact that we now desegregate our test data and other assessment results by individual student groups. So, we have to make sure that everyone's achieving and that students are not hidden in that whole or composite score, that we look by specific student groups. The Smart Board was introduced, so technology begins to really kind of infiltrate schools and will be significant as we talk further on into the course about how technology can and should impact urban education. Common Core becomes, in 2009, a big push and certainly has huge implications in all schools, but particularly a challenge for some of our urban schools. In 2011, states can apply for waivers, but again, it's going to depend on the state. 2012, we had the Sandy Hook shooting, which again, these have very profound effects, these sort of big major events on schooling and the way that we need to look at our schools and approach them. So Sandy Hook was probably a huge wake-up call, I think, to schools about how we best protect our children. So we'll talk about that when we talk about safety and security on further along. In 2015, we have this proliferation of charter and private schools and using public funds. And while that may not seem terribly significant, it really is, because a lot of people will point to the proliferation of charter and private schools as the beginning of resegregation of schools. So, we'll get into that debate a little bit longer, a little bit further into the course, but, I think the question begs to answer is, are charter schools and private schools ways for people to, again, segregate themselves so that we don't have this integrated student body? 2017, another impact, our homeschool enrollment hits the largest number ever. It's still growing exponentially. So a lot of people are not happy with what's going on in the school systems, and you see this a lot in our urban centers. So they're pulling their kids out and they're homeschooling them. So how does that impact? We'll talk about it. Then, of course, in 2018, digital education just really kind of blows up, and we have all kinds of things happening. And so in terms of urban education, digital education, we talk a little bit about the digital divide for students. So a lot of our urban students don't have access to technology at home or even in their schools. So all of these things that are more affluent schools are able to do and provide, a lot of our urban schools simply cannot do. So we know that there's certainly some inequities occurring in education, particularly in our urban centers, because of that. Okay, so we'll talk more about this, but just kind of keep in mind as well that, our age of our students is decreasing. So, we used to not start kids till they were 6, and then we moved it back to 5. Then it became pre-K for some of our 4-year-olds. Now they're even doing 3-year-olds or early learning experiences, So education is being increasingly pushed to do sort of from a birth to adulthood model. We'll talk about why this may be particularly critical and important for urban schools. The other thing we need to know and understand is that our faculties in our schools are aging, and we are not replacing them like we were able to before. There is a teacher shortage and crisis across the country, seen most profoundly in our urban centers. So a huge issue that, part of the reform movement talks about, but, nobody's really come up with a great solution yet. So that will be part of our discussion points. Because of the economy and other pressures, that we have in society today from technology, et cetera, people are changing careers more frequently. So what we have to prepare our students for beyond the traditional K-12 or pre-K-12 educational system is really vastly different than was even 5 years ago, certainly different than it was 20 years ago. So we have to understand what that looks like and how that is impactful, and why it's important that we really address those needs, not only from a sort of basic standards or common standards approach, but also ensuring digital literacy, team building, those kind of things. And then, of course, technology. And again, we'll talk more in depth about this, but this is just kind of an overview as well as a peek into the future. So with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing and finish off the recording. So hopefully you have at least a sense of what's going on in class, and we'll dive deeper into each one of these topics. And one thing that I think it's important for us to remember when we think about urban education, there are no right or wrong answers. It's still considered a relatively new concept and idea. There's not a ton of research out there specifically about urban students and urban schools and those very specialized needs that they have. So, we get to do a lot of exploring and debating and disagreeing, but also hopefully finding some really viable and good solutions. So welcome to class, and I'm excited to be working with you guys. Have a great evening. We'll see you next week.